Shalom, all you sinister spectators. Sugar Pants here, again with another cassette tape from the catacombs. 1987's Blood Harvest, also known as The Marvelous Mervo, a tainted tidbit about a girl who visits her parents just in time for a rash of strange murders. Oh, and did I mention that the creepy clown is played by the legendary Tiny Tim? Now you're probably wondering,
well, Sugar Pants, how come it's taken you this long to feature a creepy clown on your show?
Well, to be honest, clowns give me the fucking heebie-jeebies, so I've been putting this one off. So let's file that sleaze docket and find out what this movie's gonna deliver. We have 4 dead bodies, 27 cups blood, 6 naked breasts, 2 naked butts, 2 naked bajingos, 2 shower scenes, 1 cat jump scare, Tom Peepery, countless angry rednecks, 3 throat slashings, 1 bullet to the gut, 1 bullet to the shoulder, farm tool to the forearm, wiffle ball bat to the face, arrow to the hand, dickhead sheriff cliche, instant chloroform cliche, 1 disembodied phone call exposition dump, and shag carpeting resembling a pizza. We kick things off with grease paint and ukulele.
Gary and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Gary fell down and broke his crown. And Jill came tumbling after.
Mervo singing a silly song while a body is hoisted up into the hayloft. Meanwhile, Gary watches from inside the house as a pair of bodies are loaded up into the meat wagon. Immediately, we cut to a property auction for the Anderson farm, but the local rednecks don't seem too happy about it. But I used to live in farm country, and in my opinion, the local rednecks are rarely happy. Then whoever was hanging in the farm gets his throat slit. That's seriously an awful lot of stuff happening before the title card. As the credits roll, Jill is walking down a dirt road looking like a member of Jem and the Hologram's rival band, The Misfits. In the clunkiest of clunky exposition, we hear the audio of a one-sided phone call she made earlier in the week about coming home for a visit. Apparently, her banker dad is having to foreclose on some properties, but hates having to do it to the people he's lived among for years. She eventually stops off at the town bank and asks if her dad is in, but the teller doesn't seem to know where her parents are at. Jill continues down the road towards the diner, and suddenly I've got a hankering for some buttery club crackers and an ice-cold Dr. Pepper, or maybe a Pepsi. Not sure why. Mervo's watching the All Exposition channel as the news talks about the protests forming to stop the foreclosure of all the farms. Jill's chatting with her old friend Sarah at the diner, talking about her boyfriend while getting the stink eye from the nearby shit kicker. He spits on the floor and leaves. Sarah tells Jill her family isn't very popular these days and gives her a lift to her parents' house. When she gets there, she sees obscenities painted on the outside walls and runs to see if her folks are okay. Inside the door, she runs into a body hanging from the rafters. Oh, it's just a scarecrow with an arrow through the chest. No big deal. She slowly walks inside and runs into the Marvelous Mervo, who's there to welcome her home. But he seems a bit annoyed she's ignoring the bouquet he picked for her. Gary comes in and yells at Mervo for scaring Jill, and she asks if they've seen her parents. He says he spoke to her dad yesterday. Gary says he'll take Mervo, his crazy brother, home. Jill goes up to her old room, and the soundtrack starts sounding a lot like Styx all of a sudden. The phone rings, but it's just a dirty phone call. Then a brick is chucked through the bedroom window. Jill goes outside and notices Mervo snooping around the old barn. She heads into the nearby woods and runs into a bunch of gun-toting, camo-clad rednecks. She takes off running, but one shoots her in the head! Oh, they're just using paintballs. She tells them she's trying to get into town, and they offer her a lift to apologize for scaring the hell out of her. At the sheriff's office, she reports the brick, the vandalism, the phone calls, and that she can't find her parents. But this is a small-town 80s movie, so the sheriff is completely incompetent. Mervo heads to a storm cellar where there's an old woman tied to a chair, and he offers her some food.
It puts the lotion on. You have no idea what kind of hell I can bring you!
Oh, all right, enough, you broken record, okay?
The sheriff drives Jill out to her parents' house to check on her reports, but the vandalism has been taken care of. The paint has been cleaned up, and even the windows have been repaired. Jill starts unpacking, and there's a fucking cat jump scare hiding in her dresser. Gary invites himself in. Does anybody fucking knock in this town? And he confesses that he helped clean up the mess. Jill laughs about trying to explain it to the sheriff. Gary reminds Jill that the town is very mad because of the recent foreclosures and that her folks probably left town to get away for a while.
Say, what about a walk?
What about a walk? Mervo's at the church, kneeling down in front of the altar and singing hymnals, sobbing,
Why are they dead? Why are they dead?
The priest approaches him and asks if anything's wrong, but Mervo quickly leaves. Gary takes Jill to their old childhood treehouse, and they reminisce about the old days before she left for college. He confesses he was always crazy about her. Jill then says she's sorry to hear about the death of Gary's parents. Gary says the report was they were hanging dead in the barn for 3 days when he got the call. When he got back to town, he was so upset he had to completely take the barn down. Which is the exact kind of topic that gets us ready for a rollin' in the grass. Hey Hollywood, I know you love putting this shit in your movies, but you really should do a quick Google search and learn all you can about ticks and chiggers. Because those of us who live in rural areas learn real fast to never do this. There ain't nothing romantic about Lyme disease. Jill tells Gary she's only back temporarily because she's engaged to her college boyfriend. His mood takes a sudden dive, and he takes off saying he's got chores to do and needs to check on Merv. Jill's on the phone with her aunt, checking all family members to see if they know where her parents are at. She says she's been trying everyone and that her mom knew she was coming for a visit. And then it's shower time. We get some obligatory nudity, and someone's messing with the water pressure. Mervo's also skulking around and just barges in, giving Jill a scare. Hey Jill, how often do you have to find somebody in your house that you didn't invite in before you start locking the goddamn door? She offers Mervo a cup of coffee, but he says he'll make it instead. Then he starts creeping her out with his act before leaving.
That's because I'm a juggalo? ICP! It's St. Clown Posse, yo. I'm like a diehard fan.
Cut to the empty chair in the storm cellar, completely devoid of old woman. Who was it? Why was she tied to the chair? Where did she go? Don't expect many of those questions to be answered. Jill's getting ready for bed when a weird noise startles her. Someone's on the creaky swing outside. She calls the sheriff to ask if he'll come over and take care of it, but the sheriff is busy with his deck of cards.
There goes the damn poker game.
Hey asshole, maybe if you want guaranteed leisure time, don't be the only law enforcement for the Tri-County area. As soon as she hangs up the phone, it rings right back, and it's her fiancé Scott saying he's been trying to call her. She catches him up on all the issues and stays on the line until the sheriff arrives. Turns out it was just Mervo hanging around and making sure nobody hurt her. Finally, Jill goes to bed, and a shadowy figure opens her bedroom window and goes inside. The person chloroforms Jill, rips her robe open, and snaps several Polaroids of her mostly nude body. Elsewhere, the creeper is posting larger photographs on his wall. Hey, wait a minute. The photographs show Jill wearing a bra, but she was topless for the actual photo shoot. Next morning, Jill is woken up by a kiss. It's her fiancé, Scott. Seriously, Jill, lock the fucking doors and windows. She's very happy to see him, and the two frolic through the house before getting busy on the living room shag carpet. About that time, Gary shows up to check on Jill and notices a strange car parked in the driveway. Gary creeps around to the side window and doesn't seem too thrilled at the peep show, but he stays and watches. The show is interrupted by a phone call from Sarah, and Gary takes off. Scott says there's no beer in the fridge, so he heads into town to get some, and he says he'll have a chat with the do-nothing sheriff while he's there. But before he can leave, he notices Sasquatch romping through the tall grass and follows whoever the hell it was. He follows all the way to the old barn and gets his skull bashed in by a wiffle ball bat. Scott's body is dragged inside, and suddenly we see Gary come running. He tells Jill he saw a strange car and wanted to check to see if she was okay. Then Mervo gives Jill an accidental scare, and Gary forces him inside to apologize. And this is probably my biggest gripe about the movie. They keep trying to trick us into who the killer is, but it's pretty obvious at this point, right? Like, nobody's guessing anymore, right? Sarah shows up just as Mervo is being escorted home and keeps her company most of the day. She finally leaves to get to her shift at the cafe. Jill turns on the radio, which is now playing corporate retreat music. And today, 3M is a vibrant company, combining innovation, effective risk management, and marketing. 3M! Sarah can't get into her car and is attacked by a partially masked individual wielding a bow and arrow. She takes off for the barn, and an arrow pins her hand to a support beam. The creeper starts ripping off Sarah's clothes and hangs her upside down. Eventually, he slashes her throat. Jill answers a knock on the door, and it's Gary asking if she's seen Merv. She invites him in, saying he's never seen him so upset. Jill says Scott hasn't come back either, and that this all feels like a bad dream. And I need to point out that Jill has literally spent the entire day without putting on any pants. I'm not complaining, just making an observation. And she's had plenty of guests come and go. Mervo's back at home saying his prayers, singing his hymns, and looking through his photo albums. Jill's made some phone calls, but nobody's seen Scott or Sarah. Gary makes the joke that Scott and Sarah met up and ran away together. He then invites Jill to stay at his place before leaving. That's when she finally breaks down over a photograph and cries herself to sleep on the couch. Back in the barn, we find Scott hanging upside down, but still alive. And Jill still hasn't learned how to lock the fucking doors before going to bed, so she gets another visit while asleep. The creeper chloroforms her a second time and carries her out the door. And at this point, is there anyone in the audience who doesn't believe that Gary is the killer? Really? That many? Well, let's keep watching and find out. The creep carries Jill to the barn and makes Scott watch while he undresses and fondles her. But suddenly, the do-nothing sheriff decides to use his siren like it's an emergency, and the creep carries Jill back to the couch. And after hauling ass all the way out to the farm, the sheriff checks a couple windows and leaves! Jesus, go back to your softball poker game, you useless fuck. After the sheriff leaves, Scott gets his throat slashed and the blood is drained into a bucket. Jill finally comes to and goes to the fridge where the bucket was rigged to spill all over her. Gary is immediately there and gets in the shower with her. Jesus fucking Christ. Jill has to be one of the slowest fucking horror victims I've ever seen. How many red flags does this lunatic have to throw at you before you get the fuck out of there? At the very least, lock the goddamn house up. Gary carries her naked body to the couch and starts kissing her all over before wrapping her in a blanket and watching her sleep from across the room. He then starts taking off his clothes and climbs on top of Jill. Finally, Jill comes to and tells him to leave her alone. She says she understands his feelings, but she's with someone else. Suddenly, everyone's an emotional wreck.
Tell me, where does all the magic go? When the curtain falls to end the show, do the clowns always cry when they pack up the paper sky? Will there still be a clown in the sky for me?
Finally, Jill puts some fucking clothes on just in time for Merv to ask her to go with him, saying there are things she has to know. He takes her back to his house where he shows his parents' suicide note explaining they have nothing to live for now that the farm is being taken away from them. She also sees the naked Polaroids Gary took of her. Merv then says that Gary made the suicide look like murder so the town would feel sorry for them, and then said if Merv told anyone, they'd put him in a home. Just then, Gary comes in and catches them. Merv swears he didn't say anything and grabs Jill around the neck. Gary tells him to let her go, and the two begin to struggle. Merv reaches for a pair of scissors, but Jill grabs a gun and shoots Merv. Great job, Jill. You woke up to Gary lying on you naked. You now have photographic proof he's been sneaking into your house, but instead you kill the weirdo who has done more for you than the goddamn sheriff. Gary flies off the deep end even harder and goes on about how life is now perfect.
There's only you and me and no one else.
He says they can finally start their family. Jill runs all the way to her home and tries to make a phone call, but Gary is right behind her. Oh, what a twist! The guy who looks like Gary with pantyhose on his head turned out to be Gary with pantyhose on his head. Jill runs to the barn and finds the bodies of Scott, Sarah, the woman who was tied to the chair from earlier, and the guy killed at the beginning. I assume those are Jill's parents. A couple of times it looks like Jill is going to say mom or dad, but she's speaking really quietly and the music stings get in the way. Let's just say those are her parents, that they're dead, and move on. Gary starts monologuing, but Jill says they can pin the whole thing on Merv and the two of them can get away together. She then makes a really bad attempt at escaping and gets literally 2 feet away. But fortunately, she's able to grab a random farm tool and stab Gary through the arm. She takes off towards the town, but Gary's right on her tail with his trusty knife. She eventually makes it to an abandoned, crumbling farm and ends up cornered and covered in pig's blood. She tries to fight, but Gary wins out and drags her back to the barn to tie her up. He gives her one last kiss goodbye and is suddenly shot by Merv. He unties Jill and leads her to safety. The camera pans back to Gary, whose eyes pop open, and we roll the credits. And that's Blood Harvest, a slasher flick that tries to be a mystery over who the killer will end up being, but fails once you think about it for about 20 seconds. A lot of this movie has a been there, done that sort of feel. Though I have to give credit to Tiny Tim. Until I saw this movie, I never would have expected to see him do a horror movie. I always thought he was too wholesome for that kind of film. But he did a good job. I just kind of wish the script made him more of a plausible killer instead of an obvious red herring. Blood Harvest was directed by Bill Rebane, but you might know him as a 2-time MST3K target, as he also directed Monster A Go-Go and The Giant Spider Invasion.
Go Packers! Honey, I'm home. Honey, Packers won the Super Bowl. Woo!
Etonia Salchek played the lovely, yet dumb as paint Jill in her only acting credit. Apparently, after this movie, she disappeared off the face of the earth because nobody seems to know what happened to her. Which is a shame, because I thought she was pretty good in her first ever acting role. Definitely cute and willing to go all out for the part. After watching this one, I was hoping to see her in other movies, but details about her are basically non-existent. Probably the cast member with the biggest success would be Peter Krause, who played Scott, or as the credits called him, Boyfriend. Some of his other acting credits include 33 episodes of Carol and Company, 3 episodes of Beverly Hills 90210, 23 episodes of Sybil, The Truman Show, and 63 episodes of 6 Feet Under. Well, that was my first creepy clown movie, and I'm going to try real hard not to compare myself to the late great Tiny Tim. At least until one of my songs makes it to an episode of SpongeBob SquarePants. But most of my songs include graphic sexual content, so the odds of that happening are pretty slim. So until I greet you again for another heapin' helpin' of hellacious hedonism, this is your old pal Sugar Pants. See you in your dreams.
At night, when the mask is off, I look at myself. I may make the world think I'm happy, but I can't hide the truth from myself. Whatever happens, I must go on acting. Be a Pagliaccio love. Clown, love.